Utah gets a lot of good press. Stunning national parks, a booming economy, outdoor recreation that people move across the country for. But not every corner of the state looks like a Patagonia catalog. Some places in Utah have crime rates that would make your jaw drop, economies that dried up decades ago, or living conditions that are, to put it gently, not exactly what the tourism board is advertising. Today, we're going there. These are 26 places in Utah nobody wants to live in. 26? Grantsville. Grantsville sits in Tooele County, about 35 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. It's small, just over 11,000 people, and it has the kind of economy that makes people nervous. The unemployment rate runs above the state average, and while the median household income isn't rock bottom, finding actual work nearby is a real challenge. Most residents who have jobs are commuting long distances into the Salt Lake metro area, which means Grantsville functions more as a bedroom community than a self-sustaining town. Property crime is also a consistent issue here. The area is flat, dry, and hemmed in by the Stansbury Mountains on one side and the Great Salt Lake Desert on the other. It's not exactly rich with amenities either. No major shopping, limited dining, limited healthcare options. If you need anything beyond the basics, you're driving. 25. Riverdale. Riverdale is a small suburb just outside of Ogden, with a population of around 9,400. What it lacks in size, it more than makes up for in crime statistics. The total crime rate in Riverdale runs more than 100% above the national average, and the property crime rate is especially high. Your odds of being the victim of a crime here are roughly 1 in 20, which is not a number you want attached to a neighborhood description. The economy is sluggish. Unemployment runs above the state average, and there's not much of an independent economic engine here. Riverdale leans on Ogden for everything: jobs, entertainment, services, which is fine until Ogden itself has problems of its own. The town doesn't have much of an identity beyond being a strip of commercial development along Washington Boulevard. It's the kind of place people describe as a pass-through more than a destination. 24. Brigham City. Brigham City is in Box Elder County, about 60 miles north of Salt Lake City. It has a historic downtown that locals are proud of, and it sits in a pretty corner of northern Utah near the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. But charm doesn't solve everything. Brigham City has crime rates that consistently land it on state-level most dangerous lists. Violent crime is higher than the state average, and the local economy is narrow, centered around some manufacturing and defense-related employment at nearby Teocalli, which has gone through its share of restructuring over the years. The city has struggled to attract new investment, and the population is not growing at the rate that would signal economic health. For a city that's been around since the 1850s, it has stagnated in ways that are hard to paper over with historical charm. 23. Cedar City. Cedar City has some genuine appeal. It's home to Southern Utah University, it has the Utah Shakespeare Festival, which draws a surprisingly serious cultural crowd, and it's positioned near Zion and Bryce Canyon. But it has been on multiple lists of Utah's most dangerous cities, and that's not a reputation that goes away with good theater. Violent crime in Cedar City runs above the state average. The economy is heavily driven by the university and tourism, which means it's seasonal and not particularly stable. Housing costs have risen sharply as southern Utah has grown in popularity, but wages haven't kept pace. That combination, rising cost, flat wages, moderate crime, makes Cedar City less appealing than its geography would suggest. The weather can also be brutal. Cedar City sits at nearly 5,800 feet in elevation, which means genuine winter cold, regular snowfall, and a wind that makes flatlanders genuinely uncomfortable. That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but stacked against the other issues, it adds up. 22. Washington. Washington, Utah is a city in Washington County near St. George. The name will confuse anyone from out of state, but the issues are clearer. Washington has historically ranked among Utah's more dangerous cities relative to its size, specifically for violent crime. It made multiple state crime rankings due to its murder rate per capita and property crime frequency, which are both notably elevated for a city this size. The explosive growth in Washington County over the last decade has strained infrastructure considerably. Roads, water systems, and services have struggled to keep up with population influx. Rapid growth without adequate planning tends to produce exactly the kind of livability problems Washington is now known for. 21. West Valley City. West Valley City is the second largest city in Utah, with a population of around 140,000, and it carries one of the higher crime rates in the state. In a recent year, the city recorded 8 murders, 97 robberies, and over 400 assaults. Residents have roughly a 1 in 31 chance of becoming a crime victim, which is well above what you'd hope for in a family suburb. The city is essentially a dense residential area southwest of Salt Lake City without much of a distinct identity. It has shopping and services, but little that distinguishes it as a place people choose over the neighboring areas. Much of the housing stock is older and unremarkable, and the area has had persistent issues with gang activity. West Valley City isn't dangerous in the way that makes national news on a daily basis. It's more the slow burn kind of unsafe, where property crime is routine and violent incidents are frequent enough to be a real concern for residents. 20. Murray. Murray is a suburb of Salt Lake City with a population of around 50,000, and it consistently earns a spot on Utah's crime watch lists. The crime rate in Murray is more than 130% above the national average. Property crime is the dominant issue. Car theft, larceny, and burglary are common occurrences. There was 1 murder and more than 30 robberies in a recent reporting year, which sounds manageable until you factor in the city's size. Murray is not poor. The median income is decent and housing is expensive. But crime doesn't strictly follow poverty, and Murray demonstrates that. The proximity to major roadways and commercial corridors makes it a target for property criminals who move through quickly. Longtime residents know which neighborhoods to avoid and which parking lots to think twice about. And that kind of institutional knowledge isn't a great endorsement. 19. Midvale. Midvale sits just south of Salt Lake City and has a population of around 34,000. It lands on almost every major worst of list for Utah, and the crime figures back that up. Violent crimes, including assaults, are not uncommon. Property crime is persistently elevated, and the cost of living is above the state average, even as the area offers limited economic upside. The median home value here has climbed past $470,000, which is difficult to justify given the crime environment and the fact that services, groceries, and healthcare all cost more than the national average. People live in Midvale largely because of its proximity to Salt Lake City, not because of anything Midvale itself offers. 18. Ogden. Ogden is a proper city, population around 87,000, historic downtown, legitimate art scene, and proximity to some excellent skiing in the Wasatch Mountains. But it has a crime problem that's been hard to shake for decades. In a recent year, Ogden recorded 417 violent crimes and over 3,200 property crimes. It has one of the highest crime rates in the state, and the gap between the scenic surroundings and the urban reality inside the city is stark. Gang activity has been a persistent issue in Ogden, particularly in certain neighborhoods. The city has made genuine efforts at revitalization in its historic 25th Street area, and there are real pockets of energy and investment. but you can't fully renovate your way out of structural crime problems, and Ogden is still working through that. The economic base is narrower than a city this size should have. Manufacturing, government employment, and logistics make up the core. It's not a growth economy. And while the mountains to the east are genuinely beautiful, the neighborhoods between the freeway and the foothills tell a different story that the tourism shots don't include. 17. South Salt Lake. South Salt Lake is a city of around 26,000 people that essentially forms a dense urban pocket just south of Salt Lake City proper. It holds the distinction of being ranked the single most dangerous city in Utah in multiple recent analyses. The total crime rate runs at 62 per 1,000 residents, with a 1 in 16 chance of becoming a crime victim, the highest in the state. Drug trafficking is a well-documented driver of crime in the area. The median household income is among the lowest in Utah, and education levels are below the state average. Home values are low, not in a charming, affordable hidden gem way, but in a "this reflects disinvestment" way. If South Salt Lake were incorporated into Salt Lake City, it would pull the capital's crime statistics sharply upward. As its own municipality, it carries those numbers alone. 16. Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is the capital, the largest city in the state, the cultural and economic hub of Utah. It's also, by crime statistics, the most dangerous city in Utah. The crime rate sits at 218% above the national average, with 13 murders recorded in 2022. Robbery, assault, burglary, and drug-related theft are the most common offense types. This is not unusual for a state capital or major urban center. Cities carry higher crime rates by nature of density and concentration. But Salt Lake City's numbers are high, even by those standards. The drug and homelessness crisis in certain parts of the city, particularly around the Rio Grande area, has been a major and unresolved policy challenge for years. None of this means Salt Lake City is a wasteland. It's clearly not. But the gap between its national image as a clean, outdoorsy mountain city and the reality of its crime statistics is significant enough to include here. 15. Tooele. Tooele is about 35 miles southwest of Salt Lake City and has a population of around 34,000. The area is also home to an industrial history that locals lived with for decades. The Tooele Chemical Agent Disposal Facility began destroying the nation's largest stockpile of chemical weapons in August 1996, a process that ran for 16 years and wasn't completed until January 2012. That's a long time to live next to an incinerator processing nerve agents and mustard gas. The unemployment rate runs at the higher end of the state range, and property crime is elevated. Violent crime is also frequent enough to have landed Tooele on multiple state danger rankings. The median home value is below the state average, which reflects both the distance from the metro core and the limited economic dynamism of the area. Tooele feels like a place where the economy peaked sometime in the mid-20th century and has been managing the decline ever since. There have been some newer residential developments as the Salt Lake Metro has spread westward, but that growth hasn't been matched by economic opportunity within Tooele itself. People move there for cheaper housing and then commute east, which means the city gains residents without gaining much of a tax-generating economic base. 14. Roosevelt. Roosevelt is in Duchesne County in the Uinta Basin, and it tops multiple state rankings as the worst place to live in Utah. The population is only around 7,000. Unemployment has historically run as high as 8 to 9%. Poverty is a significant feature of daily life. Crime rates are about 40% above the national average, and violent incidents, particularly assaults, have been rising. The local economy is closely tied to oil and gas extraction in the Uinta Basin. When energy prices are good, things are relatively stable. When they're not, Roosevelt has very little to fall back on. The town is geographically isolated. It's a 3-hour drive from Salt Lake City across terrain that's beautiful and absolutely unforgiving. Catalytic converter theft has been a specific local problem, driven partly by the overnight truck fleets parked along Main Street that provide easy targets. If your place is known for catalytic converter theft, you're not attracting new residents. 13. Price. Price sits in Carbon County in central Utah, and it wears its post-coal economy on its sleeve. The county was built around coal mining, and as the industry declined, Price declined with it. The population is around 8,200 and has been shrinking steadily. There isn't much to replace what was lost. Crime here is higher than 84% of Utah's cities and towns. The odds of being a victim of violent or property crime are roughly 1 in 51, which is well above the state average for a town this size. Property crime is the dominant category. 486 incidents were recorded in a recent reporting year for a population of barely 8,000 people. There's not much to do in Price, and that's not just a casual observation. Limited dining, limited retail, limited entertainment options. Eastern Utah is stunningly scenic if you know where to look, but Price itself doesn't benefit much from tourism the way Moab does. The coal economy is not coming back, and what replaces it hasn't arrived yet in any meaningful way. The city has been waiting for that second chapter for a long time. 12. Moab. This one surprises people. Moab is famous. It's the gateway to Arches and Canyonlands National Parks. It draws hundreds of thousands of visitors a year for hiking, mountain biking, and off-road adventures. The scenery is genuinely extraordinary, and yet, Moab has a crime rate about 19% above the national average, with 2,755 incidents per 100,000 residents. The violent crime rate of 5.4 per 1,000 is elevated, and assault spikes notably after weekends of bar traffic and tourist congestion. Smash and grab thefts at trailheads are frequent enough that the local police regularly warn visitors to leave nothing visible in their cars. The real issue for residents, not tourists, is the cost of living. Moab's housing market has been severely distorted by short-term rental demand and second home buyers. A town of around 5,400 permanent residents cannot sustain a local workforce when a one-bedroom apartment costs what it costs in a major city. Service workers, teachers, and healthcare workers have been priced out. The people who keep Moab running for tourists often can't afford to live there themselves. It's a place that looks incredible from the outside and is quietly hollowing out on the inside. 11. Park City. Park City is wealthy, scenic, ski-famous, and, depending on who you ask, deeply unpleasant to actually live in if you're not already wealthy. The median home value is extraordinarily high. The traffic during ski season is a genuine quality of life issue, and the cost of basic services is elevated because the economy is calibrated for affluent visitors. Crime-wise, Park City punches well above its weight. It has the state's highest reported rate of rape per 1,000 residents, a statistic that should stop anyone's vacation planning cold. The festival and ski crowd brings with it a significant uptick in property crime as well. Gear theft from ski lockers and vehicle break-ins in resort parking areas are well-documented seasonal problems. For an area of only about 8,500 permanent residents, the crime numbers are remarkable. The small population means it doesn't take many incidents to generate a high per capita rate, but it's just statistics isn't a particularly reassuring response when you're living there year-round while tourists cycle through. 10. Hurricane. The name alone deserves a mention. Hurricane, Utah, pronounced Hurricane by locals, which feels like an act of defiance toward geography, sits in Washington County near St. George. It's an odd name for a desert town, and the origin is actually benign. An early settler had a wagon wheel blow off in a whirlwind and decided that was dramatic enough to name a town after. The economy here is sluggish relative to the rest of southern Utah's growth. Unemployment has run at 5.4% with a meaningful poverty rate, around 12% of residents below the poverty line. What makes Hurricane particularly frustrating is that the median home value has pushed past $480,000, which is very difficult to afford on local wages. You're paying premium prices for a place that isn't offering premium conditions. Robberies are a recurring problem. The rapid growth of Washington County has brought construction and transient workers to the area, which historically correlates with increases in property crime. 9. Payson. Payson is in Utah County, about 60 miles south of Salt Lake City. It's made various dangerous city lists over the years, primarily for violent crime and property crime rates that exceed what you'd expect from a smaller city in an otherwise family-oriented county. The city has grown fairly quickly as people have been pushed south from the more expensive Salt Lake and Utah Valley areas. Rapid residential growth without corresponding commercial or infrastructure investment tends to produce livability problems, and Payson shows that pattern clearly. Services are stretched, roads need work, and crime has ticked upward. Utah County as a whole has a strong reputation as a quiet, family-friendly area, but Payson sits at the edges of that reputation rather than at its center. 8. Sandy. Sandy might surprise people. It's a well-established suburb of Salt Lake City with good schools and parks, reasonable amenities, and a population of around 100,000. But Sandy has appeared on state rankings for overall crime, including placement on lists of Utah's most dangerous cities, and that's not a label it's entirely shaken. Property crime is the main driver. Sandy's position along major commercial corridors and its density makes it a target for organized retail theft, vehicle crime, and burglary. The city is also expensive. Housing costs are well above the state median, which means you're paying Salt Lake City suburb prices while dealing with crime rates that are higher than many of those same suburbs. 7. West Jordan. West Jordan rounds out the Wasatch Front suburbs that punch above their weight in crime. With a population of around 116,000, it's one of the larger cities in the state and consistently shows up in statewide dangerous city analyses. Violent crime and property crime both run elevated compared to the state average. The city lacks a strong civic center or distinguishing identity. It's residential sprawl without much of a downtown anchor, which means people live there primarily for the lower housing costs relative to Salt Lake City, not because West Jordan itself draws them. When the main selling point is it's cheaper than next door, the community tends to attract a transient population that doesn't put down deep roots, which can make crime mitigation harder. West Jordan has been trying to build more of a downtown presence, but it's slow going when the city's reputation is defined by what it isn't rather than what it is. 6. Clearfield. Clearfield is in Davis County north of Salt Lake City, with a population of around 32,000. It is heavily influenced by the adjacent Hill Air Force Base, which provides economic stability, but also a constant turnover of military families that gives the city a somewhat impermanent feel. Crime in Clearfield is consistently above the state average. Property crime in particular is a recurring problem. The commercial strip along State Street is aging and has seen disinvestment over the years as newer development has moved to neighboring Layton and Syracuse. Clearfield feels like a city that's been waiting for a revival that hasn't quite arrived. 5. Springville. Springville in Utah County calls itself the Art City, a nod to its history of supporting the arts and a museum that genuinely has a solid regional reputation. What it doesn't advertise is a crime rate that's notably high for a city of its size and location. Property crime is the dominant issue, but violent crime is also a concern. The rapid growth of Utah County has put pressure on Springville's services and infrastructure. Housing costs have risen sharply, driven by the broader Utah Valley real estate market, without a corresponding improvement in public safety or amenities. It's a pleasant-looking place that has some real quality-of-life issues underneath the surface. 4. Magna. Magna is an unincorporated community in Salt Lake County, west of Salt Lake City, with a population of around 28,000. Being unincorporated matters. It means Magna lacks its own city government and depends on Salt Lake County for services, which often means slower response times and fewer resources than a proper municipality would have. The economic profile here is modest. Median incomes are below the county average, and the community has long struggled to attract the kind of investment that would improve it. Crime is a persistent issue, with both violent and property crime running above county averages. Environmental concerns. Magna sits near the tailings of the historic Kennecott copper mine and has historically had air quality issues. Add another layer to the livability concerns. 3. Kearns. Kearns is another unincorporated community in Salt Lake County, west of Salt Lake City, with about 36,000 residents. Like Magna, the lack of formal incorporation means limited political leverage and service delivery that depends entirely on the county's priorities. Crime in Kearns is a serious and well-documented problem. The community has struggled with gang activity for years, and violent crime rates are among the highest in the Salt Lake Valley. Property crime is also pervasive. Housing is older, much of it built during the post-Pubaywanutuyay boom when Kearns developed rapidly, and hasn't been maintained or upgraded at the same pace as neighboring communities. Kearns doesn't have the infrastructure of a city despite having the population of one. That gap between size and governance capacity shows up in everything from road maintenance to public safety response. There's a real sense among longtime residents that Kearns has been underserved for decades. And the crime statistics suggest that's not just a perception problem. 2. Mill Creek. Mill Creek was officially incorporated on December 28, 2016, after decades as an unincorporated area of Salt Lake County. The incorporation was meant to give residents more local control and improve services. The results have been mixed. The transition from county governance to city governance is not simple, and Mill Creek has been working through growing pains that include crime management, zoning challenges, and service delivery coordination. Crime here runs above the state average, particularly for property offenses. The area is dense and diverse, ethnically and economically, which has positives, but also means concentrated pockets of poverty that correlate with elevated crime. Mill Creek is sandwiched between Salt Lake City and other Salt Lake suburbs, which means it gets spillover from SLC's crime patterns without the city-level resources to address them effectively. 1. South Salt Lake, deeper look. We touched on South Salt Lake earlier in this list, but it earns the top spot, so it's worth going a little deeper. South Salt Lake is not a forgotten rural town or an isolated oil patch community. It's a dense urban municipality of 26,000 people sitting directly adjacent to the state capital, bordered by highways and commercial corridors that are among the most trafficked in Utah. And it is, by current data, the single most dangerous place in Utah to live. A total crime rate of 62 per 1,000 residents, a 1 in 16 chance of becoming a crime victim, violent crime rate of 8.9 per 1,000, drug trafficking deeply embedded in the community fabric, the lowest median incomes, and lowest home values in the Salt Lake metro area. education levels well below the state average. One longtime South Salt Lake resident put it plainly in a community forum a few years ago. "We've been overlooked for so long that people forgot we exist until something bad happens here." What makes South Salt Lake's position so difficult is that proximity to Salt Lake City's resources hasn't helped it. The investment, the revitalization, the tech economy growth, all of that has happened in SLC proper, in Sugar House, in the Granary District. South Salt Lake sits next door and absorbs the overflow without absorbing the benefits. It's not hopeless. There are community organizations working hard there, and some investment has slowly arrived. But right now, based on the numbers, it's the place in Utah that most people with a choice would not choose. Utah is genuinely one of the more remarkable states in the country. The landscape alone is enough to make that case. But like everywhere, it has its shadows. The places on this list aren't failures of the people who live in them. They're the product of policy decisions, economic shifts, geographic isolation, and decades of disinvestment that don't get fixed overnight. If you found this useful or want to push back on any of these picks, which, fair enough, not everyone will agree, hit the like button and subscribe. We put these together carefully, and there's plenty more where this came from.